Today's focus is going to be on light and how we see it. So the first part that we're going to focus on are the parts of the eye. There are four main parts that you're going to have to be able to identify. The first one is your pupil. The pupil is the black part of your eye that allows light to enter. So the larger your black part of your eye is, or the pupil, the more light that it allows in, the smaller it is, the less light that is allowed in. The lens is what focuses your light or allows you to focus on different things. So when you think of like a camera lens, it focuses it. That's exactly what the lens of your eye does. Now, how you can tell that your lens is changing is if you hold out a book far at arm's length and try to read it versus if you move it like right next to your eyes and try to read it, you'll notice that transition, and that's the transition of the lens changing its shape. The iris is the colored part of your eye. So when you say you have green eyes, you're actually saying that your iris is green. And what's cool to note is that the iris is actually the thing that changes its shape, so it'll be the one that expands or contracts over the pupil to change the size of the pupil. The pupil actually never changes its size. It's the iris that either covers up more or less of it to allow the pupil to allow less or more light. The retina is the back of your eye. And that's where all your photoreceptor nerve cells are. The photoreceptors, photo means light, receptive means that it's the things that receive it. And so it's the things that receive light and then it transfers that information up to your brain to process. There are two types of photoreceptors that you're going to need to know. One are rods and the other are cones. Okay, rods are a rod shape, but they are the thing that are light sensitive. They detect whether it's light or dark. Cones detect your color. There are three types of cones. There's red, green, and blue, and they will tell you through the combinations, they will tell you whether something is in your eyes pink or green or blue or yellow or whatever. So here's an image of your cones and your rods. If you look at it, cones definitely look like cones at the end, and they are also colored. How remember that cones are detect the colors. They both have that C for color and cones, so therefore they are the ones that detect color as cones. Rods just tell whether it's light or dark, and these, as you can tell, look like rods as opposed to the cones. So just because we all species have eyes does not mean that we see things the same way at all. And so even amongst humans, we see things differently, but definitely amongst species, we see things differently. So here are a few examples of how we would see versus how other animals would see. And it all depends on what your food source is, your mating behaviors, everything like that. Your eyes have adapted to be the what you need to do in order to survive. Okay, so if we look at the left, that is what we see. The right is what dogs see. So obviously we see more vibrant colors than dogs do for whatever reason. If you look at the human versus the cat, we see a lot more sharp images, whereas the cat is a little bit blurrier. It doesn't show as much red, and it also has a wider range of vision as opposed to ours being more narrow. But this helps at night because when you look at what the cat can see without that red light, it can see a lot more and a lot better at night than us humans can, where we have a very narrowed vision. If you look at this image and the hummingbird, what I want you to note is that they can actually see, this is the ultraviolet region. The hummingbird can actually see in the ultraviolet, and that'll come into play when you see the flowers, because pollen will actually release a different color to them than we will. They can actually see it differently than how humans would see due to their need of that nectar. This is birds, so this is what humans would see versus birds. This is bees. So if you look at what a bee could see, it has a lot more in that ultraviolet region, whereas we have a lot more in our red vision. We do overlap in an area, but they definitely see a lot more in that ultraviolet region. And the reason is because of this image. So if you look at these images, the humans see a lot of bright, vibrant colors, right? It's very easy to be attracted to them as far as how pretty they are, but they're not practical to us as a food source. When you look at a bee, what they see is they just are focused all of their attention on that pollen area. So they see a flower that has a lot of pollen, whereas we just see a pure yellow flower. They see an image of where, because of that ultraviolet range, where they can focus their attention on to get their food source. This is just an overlap of all of the three that we talked about. So if you notice, both for the bees, especially bees who focus their entire lives on pollen, it is very focused on that ultraviolet region. Hummingbirds also have a high ability to see in that ultraviolet region, whereas us, we cannot see anything in that, and that's because we do not need to as opposed for our food source. All right, so not only do species see differently, but humans actually see differently. And the one that comes up a lot is color blindness. And what color blindness is that those cones that I was talking about, the red, green, blue cones, for whatever reason, for people with color blindness, they do not work properly. Okay, so I remember color blindness is cones, which is color. So the C's always go together. The one good thing about color blindness, though, is it will not get worse over time. It is what it is. So what you see as a 3-year-old is what you see as far as colors as a 90-year-old. Okay, it does not get better or worse over time. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have the people in class take this color blindness test. And if you ever go to the eye doctor, they give you this color blindness test. And so you can say what type of color blindness you are. So can I not see reds? Can I not see greens properly? Can I not see the blues? Whatever. And so you take this test, and if you see the numbers in it, then you are either colorblind or you are not. So then the next question that always comes up is, well, I'm not colorblind, but I kind of want to know what they see. Like, what do you see? Because it's really impossible for me to not see that it's red and green. What do you see? So I've given these pictures to some people who have been colorblind over the years, and they literally cannot see the differences between them. Now, there are different types of colorblindness. So depending on how extreme you are as a with your colorblindness or what type of colorblindness you have, you might be able to still differentiate between the two, but on every image, at least one student has not been able to see the difference between the years. So when we see our original of this, the colorblind people see that these two images look identical to one another. Okay, so they don't see any differences between these. Same with these. Okay, so if you look at this where we see these reds and greens, they do not see it. So when you're talking about, like, let's say picking cranberries, cranberries are red amongst green. If you're trying to pick cranberries, you cannot do that if you are colorblind because you cannot see the difference. They would be seeing this, and for you to pinpoint where all the flowers are, like this one or this one, it would be very difficult if you were colorblind, right? Because you can't see the difference between the colors. So here's just another examples. Okay. So then what also comes up is with light, sunsets and sunrises, and why is the sky red at night and things like that, okay? And why is it blue? And the reason why is because of a process called scattering. Scattering occurs when light is absorbed and re-emitted in different directions. So what you have is you have the sun. Okay, so I'm going to draw the sun, and it's releasing all of these rays, okay, and they're not yellow rays. Our eyes just pick up yellow a lot better than yellows and whites than the other colors, okay, plus white is the combination of all light, but anyways, so it's releasing all the different colors of the rainbow, okay, but what happens is that when you have an atmosphere like we do, what happens is that these rays are either absorbed and bounced off, okay, of the atmosphere, or they're allowed to pass through. The smaller the wavelength, the easier it is to get, easier it is to be scattered, right? It's easier to get scattered because what's going to happen is if I have a, let's say, blue wavelength versus a red wavelength, okay, a red length, and let's say I have some gas particles. Okay, the red wavelength is going to be easier to get through this path than the blue. The blue will most likely hit one of these guys and then bounce off. That's called scattering. This is when they're like kind of deflected off. Okay. So scattering occurs when sunlight, once again, hits off these particles and then they're bounced in different directions. So it doesn't come just straight in a line. And as I also stated, the sun looks white or yellow because we pick up more yellows and green colors. Like that's what we're sensitive to. So that's what we'll pick. The sky is blue because blue is scattered first. And so when we have the sun, okay, and it's releasing all of these different colors, okay, and then we have this lovely air particles right here, atmospheric particles, not air particles necessarily. What happens is that the blue ones, because they are moving, they have such a low wavelength and a high frequency, they're more likely to run into air particles and get deflected off, or these atmospheric particles. And so that's why we see the blue. Whereas on the other hand, if you have, let's say, the red particles, which have a longer wavelength, they're not as likely to be deflected. They can kind of go through the path a lot easier. And so what ends up is that we actually end up with reds, oranges, yellows being able to go through our atmosphere, and that's all another reason why the sun looks yellow to us, because that's what we see when we directly look up at it, because the orange, I'm sorry, not the orange, the blues and the violets have already been scattered. That's why the sun looks yellow and the sky looks blue. Okay, so this is just another image of that. So we have all the colors coming down from the sun because the sun releases white light, which makes up of Roy G. Biv. And what happens is that when it runs into our atmosphere, the blue and the shorter wavelengths are deflected off. That's why we see this area as blue. But the orange, reds, and yellows keep going straight through because they're not deflected. And that's why when we are standing here on Earth and look directly up at the sun, it looks like those reds, oranges, and yellows, because that's the only colors that are left from what the sun released. The other ones have been deflected off to make this blue sky. But then it changes at sunset. And why does it change at sunset? Well, the reason why is because reds, orange, and yellows by that time have a longer distance because the sun is now on the horizon. It's not directly above us. It actually has a longer distance to travel through the atmosphere, which means that it has more opportunities to run into gas particles, which means it has more opportunities to be scattered, which means that's when things are scattered, that's why the sun, or that's when the sky turns to that color. So when you have a sunset, the path is longer. The blues, the indigos, and the violets and the greens have already been scattered before this time, and so we are left with the scattering of reds, oranges, and yellows. Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but if you actually go above even our atmosphere, you will see a purple sky for a little bit, and that is because at that point your violet is being scattered. So it kind of follows like a rainbow if you go up and down throughout the atmosphere to see these reds, orange, yellows, greens, blues, indigos, and violets. Okay, so here's a really good image of that. So originally, this is what happens. So during the sunrise or sunset, look at how much more atmosphere you have to go through. Whereas at noon, you just have this amount. Okay, so what happens at noon is you have all of these colors going down. Roy G. Biv. Okay, but the violets and the indigos have already been bounced off over here. Now we get to the blues. The blues get scattered at right here. And so we are left with seeing a sun that is made up of the Roy, right? Okay. But when we look at the sunrise or sunset, it is a longer distance for it to travel. So where we've already had the blues go here, but we're all the way over here. So what happens is that by this distance here, we will see our oranges and our reds and our yellows being scattered. And that's why we are left with a red and orange and yellow sunset. It's because it's a longer distance, so they have more opportunities to be scattered. All right, so this is the exact same thing that we were just talking about. So it just has more opportunity to get scattered the longer distance it has. So that's why you would have red, oranges, and yellows left more here. And that's why you would see a red sky as opposed to more at noon. You would see it not as scattered. So therefore you would end up with just having a blue sky. All right, hopefully you have a basic understanding of how we see through our eyes versus how other animals and how colorblind people see comparatively. And then also have a basic understanding of why the sky is blue during the day and then why it becomes more reds at night.